Hi, my name is Bella Ford, and these are my note cards. I would like to begin by asking you to close your eyes and imagine the day you find out you or your wife are pregnant for a second time. Imagine all the emotions that might rush over you: the joy, the excitement, the nervousness, the worry. Traditionally, if you come from a Chinese family, you might prefer to have a son, but you'd be happy to have a girl too. You're so excited to tell your friends and family the news, but imagine having to keep that child a secret or being forced to abort the child because you can't get in trouble with the law or you don't want to lose your job. According to a study from the Institute of Family Studies, in 2018, there were 120 boys per 100 girls in China. In shorter terms, this means there were 30 million more men in China, and there's still a skewed gender ratio today. How did this gender ratio imbalance come about, you might ask? Well, in addition to Chinese families' preference for sons, before October 2015, Chinese citizens were only allowed to have one child. As stated in an article from Investopedia, the one-child policy ended on October 29, 2015. That means the policy was in place for an entire 35 years. 35 years of excessive birth control, abortions, and family struggles. This may not seem prevalent to your everyday life, but it's important to recognize a dictatorship in today's world and the policies a dictator might enforce against an individual's reproductive and bodily rights. My goal of this speech is not only to give you an insight as to why this policy was implemented in 1980, but how it has affected the ratio of numbers of males and females in China. Now, before you can begin to understand the effects of the one-child policy, you must understand what the one-child policy is exactly and why such a thing existed. The one-child policy was mostly enforced because China's population was growing too rapidly. The leaders of China were afraid of the loss of natural resources and economic development. And Deng Xiaoping was the leader of the People's Republic of China at the time, and he thought the one-child policy was the best solution to save China economically and financially. If a woman were to give birth to more than one child, common consequences included fines and forced sterilization. The policy ended up decreasing the birth rate and slowing down population, but little did the Republic of China understand that this was going to create an issue beyond their imaginations. Next, I'll talk to you about some specific reasons why there are more males than females. The ratio is so imbalanced because Chinese families prefer to have sons. In a journal article from Economic and Political Weekly, multiple authors explain cultural son preference, which originates from the old age security and the need for male labor. Just as in American culture, sons typically carry on the family last name. In Chinese culture, the family last name is associated with the family legacy, therefore it is up to the men to carry on the family legacy. There is also an unfair wage distribution in China, and according to an article from Asia Times, the numbers in 2013 showed that females only earned 70% of their male counterparts' earnings. This makes males more financially dependent, and especially because families and grandparents and parents lean on their children when they become elderly to take care of them. This is another reason why families would want to primarily give birth to males over females. Unfortunately, families not only desired to have sons, but they acted upon these desires through abortion and birth control. Sex selection, abortion, and child abandonment of girls became very common during the one-child policy. The third and final point I'm going to address is the lasting effects of the one-child policy and the gender ratio imbalance. Even though the ban is now lifted, the gender ratio imbalance still exists, and so do the consequences of it. If you plan to marry someone one day, will you ever have to worry about finding a wife because the male to female ratio is so off? Well, this is what Chinese citizens have had to worry about since the late 1900s. Because there are more men than women, it is difficult for Chinese men to find wives. In Chinese culture, marriage is often associated with reputation, so marriage is not only seen as an intimate bond between the husband and wife, but it is seen as a joining of two families to create a larger establishment. The gender ratio imbalance affects the growth of families as much as it affects the merging of families. As explained in the book titled The Demographic Masculinization of China, Hoping for a Son, the shortage of women may lead to a shortage of children. If this pattern continues, the birth rate would eventually drop. With the discrimination against women and a decreased amount of births, this may lead to a further shortage of women. As I conclude my speech, I'm going to give you a recap on all that I've talked about regarding the one-child policy in China. Caroline Can, a Chinese author from Foreign Policy, described her mother as being forced by the family planning office to go to the hospital to put an intrauterine device in her body. 6 months after having her second child, they tracked her down. I may have provided you with some facts today, but unless you are a mother who has been forced to abort your child or pay your life away just to have another kid, you will never understand the pain this policy has truly inflicted. No one understands the extent or knows the extent to which the one-child policy will affect the gender ratio. But yes, I know we don't live in China, and thankfully no policy like this has ever been implemented upon America, but it shows how much we can take for granted. We take for granted our freedom, our reproductive rights, our families, our siblings. Has our world really reached a point where our government can control something we value most in our lives, our families? I hope that today that I've taught you something you didn't know before, but I also hope that I've given you more things to be grateful for: the gift of life, family, and freedom.